Welcome to the Darkstream, Voxday, voxday.blogspot.com, and unauthorized.tv. One of the things we talk about from time to time on Unauthorized, both Owen and I occasionally get into it, is the topic of manhood. What does it mean to be a man? Why would you want to be a man? What is the purpose of a man? And to me, I think that picture of the man holding his daughter's hand and walking along with her sums up the entire concept in a single picture. You know, there's a lot of confusion these days with regards to what being a man means. You know, is it about being courageous? Is it about honor? Is it about fearlessness? Is it about virtue? But at the end of the day, it really comes down to one thing, and that is being the provider and protector for your children. You can be a man and never be a father, but you will never be a complete man. You'll never understand you'll never understand the fullness of it. And that's not a criticism. That's not being harsh. That's the voice of reason and experience talking. You know, there's a lot of guys these days, and really the term guys is pretty much appropriate, who are ruled by fear. They're afraid of divorce, not unreasonably. They're afraid of having children and then having those children taken from them and so forth. Again, not entirely unreasonably given the contortions of what passes for a legal system these days. But the thing is, to avoid the risk is to literally be less than a man. To avoid the chance of things not going well is the very sort of cowardice and risk avoidance that was described as unmanly in past generations. Now, I'm perfectly aware that some of the usual suspects are going to say, well, you're trying to shame me and this and that. No, I'm not trying to do any of that sort of thing at all. You know, if that's genuinely who and what you are, then you're probably not good paternal material or good husband material in the first place. You know, what I'm talking about is what I've learned over the course of, you know, more than 3 decades as an adult, as a man. And the mistake I think that a lot of people make, both young men and women, is they look at the sacrifices that becoming a father or becoming a mother entails. And they do. Becoming a father fundamentally changes your perspective, fundamentally changes a man's perspective in a way that you can never truly appreciate right up until the moment that it happens. Yeah, I mean, it's very similar to a lot of adult experiences. You know, you can talk about war all you want. You can talk about ring fighting. You can talk about sex. You can talk about many different activities, and yet you can't ever truly understand them until you've experienced it. And the same is true of fatherhood. It's really remarkable to discover the things that you no longer care about at all after you have children. You know, I used to be a car guy. When I was young and single, in my early 20s, I actually had 3 cars. I had a souped up MG, an MGB type, beautiful British racing green. I also had this Porsche 944 Turbo. And those were the 2 cars that I drove in the summer. Neither of them could be driven in the winter, so I also had a Audi 5000 that I would drive, starting in October, from like October till April. And I would have sworn that cars would always be important to me, that they were a part of my identity, part of how I saw myself. And the funny thing is, I haven't even had my own car for over 10 years now. It just doesn't even enter into the picture. I have other priorities. It's not that I couldn't, go out and get one, but I just don't care. And that's why I think it's so difficult for young men to make good decisions, because to a certain extent, they are trying to make decisions in ignorance. You have the known, but you also have the unknown that you can't understand. And in the past, young men were taught that there was a correct path to take. One of the things that's been interesting in looking over the history of the Collier Junior Classics, which were introduced in 1918, published in various editions up until 1993. And I think I've mentioned that the books are a very, very accurate analogy for the decline of Western civilization. But one of the things that is really remarkable, even in the 40-year change between the original 1918 edition and the 1958 edition, is the way in which the stories that were created to appeal to the young men, that were created to encourage them to embrace conflict and embrace risk and to seek to become heroes and to seek to become the protector and the provider and so forth. Even by 1958, those had been significantly weakened. It's kind of funny. We're actually probably going to change the order of the first volume. We're going to change the order of the stories in it. We're not going to edit them at all. They're all going to be exactly the same. But it was kind of startling to read the first 5 or 6 stories, all of which are American Indian tales. And every single one of them involves a pretty significant level of violence. And the stories in there that got edited out by 1958 were stories like My Battle Against the Catamount. And, it's just stories of young men putting themselves in harm's way in order to test themselves. What they were teaching, what these stories were teaching, was that conflict and danger are things to be embraced and things to be surmounted and foes to be vanquished. There's an old saying about fairy tales. I think it was either Tolkien or Lewis who said that the importance of fairy tales is not that it teaches children, and especially young men, that there are dragons in the world, but that it teaches them that dragons can be defeated. And I think that a lot of the young men today just simply don't believe that dragons can be defeated. And that's something that I would like to try to convince those of you who are caught up in a spirit of fear, who believe that the best thing a man can do is live a sterile life with his fancy pants and lollipops. But that's not the right path for a man. That's not a fulfilling path for a man. If you talk to most men who walk that path, it's not something that they tend to find philosophically rewarding. It's not something that they tend to find much self-satisfaction in. I mean, I'm aware of all the horror stories. I'm aware of the absolutely unfair and unjust family laws. But the reality is that usually doesn't happen. And it usually doesn't happen to people who are honest and truthful and fear God. You can look up the statistics yourself if you don't believe me. But why would you trust what the news media tells you when they tell you ridiculous things like half of all marriages end in divorce? It's not true. Not in the context that they mean it. The relevant question is, how many first marriages end in divorce? Nobody cares, how many times, some, lunatic gigolo or crazy female narcissist gets married. Of course, her first marriage fails, her second marriage fails, her third marriage fails, and if she gets married a fourth time, it's going to fail too. And it's also not true that all women are whores and that sort of thing. That's absolutely false. Just because, you happen to know a few suboptimal people, I'm willing to bet if you actually sat down and cataloged all the people of your immediate acquaintance, you'd find out that most of them are actually fairly sane, reasonably well-behaved people. Just because, just because the people who can behave badly because they're genetically blessed or socially skilled or whatever, just because they can behave badly doesn't mean that everybody does. And if you don't take the risks, the rewards that you are missing out on are beyond your understanding. One thing I liked about that picture that I chose is that it reminded me of the first time that I took one of my kids for a walk. And it was amazing how stubborn they were. They're doing the gorilla walk where you're holding onto both their arms above their head and they're just going. And it was really amazing because we must have gone nearly 110 yards, all the way down the street, all the way, around the corner, and to this little set of stairs. And, I thought maybe we were going to start heading up the stairs too. After 2 stairs, they turned around and said, "That's enough, Daddy." I said, "Should we sit down and take a break?" "Yeah, that's a good idea." So, I could never walk past that spot at the bottom of the stairs without laughing to myself and, remembering everything about that moment, right down to the sweater they were wearing. There's so many moments that that you treasure, so many experiences that you wouldn't have, that you wouldn't know. And what you really understand in those moments is, this is what I'm put on the earth to do. And I think that many, if not most, fathers would tend to agree with me. I mean, it doesn't mean that you're not going to go through difficult times. It doesn't mean that you're not going to, experience fear and sadness and disappointment. You will. But you're going to face those things one way or another in your life anyhow. We all are. We all do. But there's something to the continuation of life, of building on to the grand edifice of creation, that simply feels right and is in line with philosophical truth. I mean, if you're talking about the good, the beautiful, and the true, I mean, what is more good, beautiful, and true than the love of a father for his child? Very, very little, I would argue. And a lot of other truths stem from this truth. Why is nationalism right, whereas multiculturalism isn't? Why? Because the nation is just the family writ large. Everything begins with the family. That is why the globalism, the evil, the great octopus, the devil, that's why everything is specifically designed to destroy it. Understand that a lot of the fears and the negative emotions that you have for pursuing your proper purpose as a man were instilled in you by those who hate you, by those who fear you, and those who want to destroy you. The single most important thing you can do as a man is to marry and have children and be a good, strong father to them. Nothing else is more important. And it doesn't matter what metric you use, what philosophy you use. You want to go to scientific materialism? Fine. Evolution will tell you the same thing. You know, you want to go to Christianity, be fruitful and multiply. You want to, retreat. I guess maybe you could make a case for the irrelevance of children to Buddhism. But, if you're going to retreat there, then you can't care about anything at all, because the world is just Mara and delusion, and nothing matters except for staring into your navel until you manage to become entirely indifferent to yourself and everything else. If that's the course that you wish to pursue, good luck to you. Go and listen to the river with the ferryman. Maybe you'll find enlightenment. But if you do plan to actually engage with the rest of humanity, if you do plan to actually exist in the world, if not of it, then there is no higher purpose. What's a higher purpose? Writing a book? Curing a disease? Those are all good things. But I can tell you, as someone who's written books, who's recorded music, who's achieved not everything that I wanted to achieve, but I would say a reasonable percentage of it, nothing compares to fulfilling your true and primary purpose of being a man, becoming a father, and raising your children. It's a worthy goal. Does it mean that you're going to be able to do it even if you pursue it? No, not necessarily. It's not a given. There's literally hundreds of thousands of young men who should have become fathers who are buried across Europe and buried in the South Pacific. That's one of the great tragedies of war, is that it costs us some of our best. But that doesn't change the fact of what the purpose of a man is. And so I would just encourage you to consider what your goals are, consider what your objectives are, and compare them to what I'm talking about. Measure them against what I'm talking about. I've got, 4 best-selling, or not best, I've got 4 Billboard Top 40 club chart hits with my band Psychosonic. I've got a multi-platinum selling computer game. I've got a number of best-selling nonfiction books, and I've got a novel that people compare, favorably to the likes of George Martin and Robert Jordan and so forth. Those are all nice accomplishments, but I can tell you for an absolute fact that none of it compares to fatherhood. None of it. If you talk to Owen, with all of his success in the world of comedy, would he trade any of that, for his kids? There's no way. None. I wouldn't trade it for, the combination of, J.R. Tolkien's literary success combined with Michael Jackson's musical success and Donald Trump's political success. If your objectives are not even that high, and yet you're pursuing them instead of focusing on your primary purpose, I would suggest that maybe you might want to rethink your goals. You might want to rethink your priorities. Because there is no satisfaction, there is no self-satisfaction that can compare with knowing that you're doing what you're supposed to be doing and knowing that you're doing it right. You won't always know that you're doing it right. I guarantee you. One of the most terrifying and bewildering moments of your life is that moment when you come home from the hospital and you look at your wife, a new mother, you both realize that you're the mommy and the daddy now. That you're supposed to have all the answers, and you know you don't. This is why it's a really good thing that children can't talk right away. But again, it's a challenge. It's a conflict. Embrace it. It's a risk. Take it. Because that is the true purpose of a man. To father children, to provide for them, and to protect them. Is it difficult now? In some ways, yes. In some ways, no. At least we're not living in a cave, half freezing to death, hoping that a small injured mastodon will come by. It was kind of funny. Owen and I were talking about, is this really a world? The world is so crazy. It's so dangerous. The war and rumors of war and madness throughout the polity and invasion and all sorts of craziness. But then his wife pointed out to him, is the life our kids are facing any worse than the life that you had when you were a kid? Our kids are homeschooled and play with their animals when we were practicing drills hiding under our desks in case the Soviets nuked us or a tornado hit the school. Suddenly, we were living in the Cold War, and it's global warming today. Back then, it was the next ice age was coming, and growing up in Minnesota, we all knew that we were doomed if there was going to be another ice age. So there have always been dangers. There's always been problems. But you know what? You're here because your parents and your grandparents and your great-grandparents and on and on and on said, you know what? We don't care. We can handle it. And we can too. You can too. So, anyhow, like I said, I'm not trying to shame anybody. I'm not trying to criticize anybody. I'm just saying that the perspective that you have might not be quite as complete as it should be when you're contemplating what your true and proper purpose in life is. So, this is the Darkstream. I'm Voxday.